And welcome to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor here at Whiskey Politics. Find me at davesussman.com, theindependent.io, the Range Broadcasting Network, of course, YouTube, and all of your favorite podcast applications, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the Ricochet Network. Our guest today needs no introduction, but in case you just landed from another planet, Ted Cruz is the senator from the great state of Texas. He has dedicated his life to upholding the principles enshrined in the Constitution. After graduating from Harvard Law School, he clerked for Judge J. Michael Luttig and at the Supreme Court of the United States under Chief Justice William Rehnquist, and he became the youngest and longest-serving Solicitor General in Texas history. In 2016, Senator Cruz finished just behind Donald Trump for the Republican nomination for the President of the United States. And now many are saying that he is on a very short list of SCOTUS nominees down the road. His latest book, One Vote Away, is on SCOTUS, and it couldn't be more timely. And I'm honored to welcome Senator Ted Cruz to the show. Senator Cruz, welcome to the show. How are you today?
It's great to join you, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. It's an honor. Now, first of all, I want to go straight into a news piece that just came out a couple of hours ago that you warned that the GOP could face landslide losses similar to 1976 post-Watergate when Jimmy Carter won. You used the words highly volatile, that pertaining to the election. Is this based upon public polling or something internal that you're seeing?
So my assessment of the race is there's an incredibly high delta. The volatility is massive. I described two possible outcomes. I think we could see a very positive result for Republicans. Trump could win by a sizable margin and we could take both houses of Congress. Or on the flip side, it could be a bloodbath. Now, unsurprisingly, the media is only reporting one of those two options. I think two things drive that volatility. Number one, whether come election day, people are optimistic and feeling good about the future and going back to work and see a brighter future ahead. I think if that's the case, we could see a very good election. If they're depressed and demoralized and hopeless and everything shut down and they think it'll be shut down for a long time, we could see a terrible election. The second way of looking at it, there are two types of election. There are persuasion elections and turnout elections. I think this is a turnout election. I think it's a pure turnout election. So the left is going to show up. They are energized. They hate the president. I think they're going to crawl over broken glass to vote. The question is, does everybody else show up? And that's where the volatility is, that if people are discouraged and demoralized, if they don't vote, that's how we get into the terrible outcome. And it's what happens in the last month with turnout that I think is going to drive the entire outcome.
I think one of the motivators is also going to be SCOTUS, and I want to talk about your book and currently what's happening with SCOTUS in just a moment. But to follow up on what you were just saying, there's a tremendous amount of apprehension right now regarding the economy. Are we going in the right direction? Are we going in the wrong direction? And Pelosi wants the feds to borrow $400 billion as part of her stimulus package to, I guess, bail out blue states, their pension problems. They're talking about making available ballot harvesting across the country, voter ID ban, stimulus to illegal aliens. What the heck does that have to do with the stimulus package? And why is President Trump taking the blame right now for not wanting to sign off on this?
Look, it has nothing to do with the economy or restarting the economy. It has everything to do with trying to help her political cronies and supporters, and it's entirely political. I think it is likely that nothing passes between now and Election Day. My assessment of it is that Pelosi and Schumer don't want anything to pass, that they want to maximize the economic pain. I think their analysis is frankly the same as mine, that the more people that on Election Day are at home and alone and unemployed and broke and pissed off, the better it is for Joe Biden. So they want as many people out of work as possible. Now, I do think Pelosi is more than happy to go to the trough and try to get hundreds of billions of dollars for Democratic governors in a redistribution of wealth from red states. And I hope the administration isn't foolish enough to go along with that. But it has nothing to do with actually getting people back to work. It has everything to do with funding Planned Parenthood, funding funding the Democratic politicians who've dug huge debt holes for themselves. Those are her priorities. And part of it is, Dave, she understands no matter what happens, the media is going to blame everything on Trump. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, we've had in the Senate twice, Senate Democrats have filibustered relief legislation targeted to benefit small businesses and get the economy back to work. Every Democrat filibusters it, and the press reports Trump is blocking it. I mean, it is Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass type stuff.
Do you think Trump is permeating that right now? I know he's talking to the country through Twitter, but most people aren't on Twitter. He's certainly not able to do it outside of conservative media. Is his message getting out?
Some. The media is doing a full court press, though, and it's, look, there are a lot of people who are engaged, who are listening to podcasts, who are on social media, who are following it, but there are also a lot of people that are not necessarily following it that closely, and that's really the people who need to hear the message. I've long had a burden in my heart that Republicans spend too much time preaching to the choir, talking to the same 2.6 million people watching Fox News every night, which is great. Look, the choir needs some preaching, but there are a whole lot of people in the country, young people, Hispanics, African Americans, suburban moms, that are not following every development with bated breath, but for whom the stakes are really high, which is why I joined your world of podcasting. I mean, that's why I do the podcast Verdict with Ted Cruz, because you reach a totally different demographic.
Yeah.
And it's why I wrote the book, One Vote Away, is they're both designed to try to reach people with substance and issues and to move people's hearts and minds. I think we need to do a lot more of that.
Your book, One Vote Away, couldn't have been written at a more timelier, period. Obviously, the Senate next week is about to start confirmation hearings from Amy Coney Barrett. First of all, a lot of people don't know this. You litigated Bush v. Gore in 2000 in front of the Supreme Court. With the insanity that we're now seeing right now with unprepared states doing mail-in votes for the first time, what do you predict is going to happen this November?
I think there's enormous uncertainty, and it could lead to delay and chaos. So the book, One Vote Away, the way it's structured is each chapter addresses a different constitutional liberty. So there's one on free speech, one on religious liberty, one on the Second Amendment, and there's an entire chapter on Bush versus Gore and on democracy and elections. And what I do in the book is it's not an academic book, it's not a theoretical book, it's practical and real, and it's designed to really bring readers behind the curtain and inside the court. So Bush versus Gore, in 2000, I was part of the legal team that represented George W. Bush. I was a young lawyer at the time. I was in my late 20s. And I was working on the George W. Bush campaign. So I was down in Austin. Actually, that's where I met Heidi, my wife, as we were both in cubicles right down the hallway from each other. And if you remember what happened in 2000, Bush won on election night. He was declared the winner. But then Al Gore, the results in Florida were very close with a couple thousand votes. And so Al Gore sent a team of lawyers into Florida to challenge the outcome. And so I jumped on a plane along with a whole bunch of other lawyers, and I flew to Florida. I was in Tallahassee the whole time. And, it's interesting. Some of the books, some of the movies that have been done about Florida, they paint the recount now as this carefully orchestrated master plan and strategic, and all of that's nonsense. It was utter chaos, Dave. I describe in the book how in the war room we had a whiteboard on the wall with a chart of 7 different lawsuits, any one of which could cost the presidency of the United States. I mean, it was, the first 6 days I slept 7 hours. I mean, it was utter chaos. We went to the Supreme Court twice. The first time we won unanimously. The court agreed with George W. Bush 9-0, sent the case back. The second time, on the final question of the remedy, the court's vote was 5-4. And what the court concluded was, at that point, the ballots in Florida had been counted 4 times. Every time the ballots had been counted, George W. Bush had won. And they said, enough is enough. Under the law, the election is done. It's final. It's time to end this. That took 36 days. We had 36 days where nobody in the country knew who the next president was going to be. Nobody in the world knew who the next president was going to be. I think there is a real potential 2020 is markedly worse in that instead of just litigation in one state, Florida, we could easily see litigation in 2, 3, 4, 5 states. And we could see the Biden campaign challenging the outcome. We could see the Trump campaign challenging the outcome, or it's entirely possible we see both happen. It may be that Trump wins some states, Gore wins some states, or Biden wins some states, and they each challenge the other, which could lead to chaos. And it's one of the reasons it's so important that we confirm Judge Barrett before Election Day, because an 8-justice Supreme Court can deadlock 4-4, and a 4-4 court can't decide anything. Which means you look at Bush versus Gore, how that chaos ended. It ended with the Supreme Court deciding, under the law, here's the answer. If we have an 8-justice court, we could end up with conflicting decisions from multiple federal courts of appeals and a deadlock the Supreme Court that can't resolve it, which would be a full-on constitutional crisis. It would just be, we could see weeks or months of uncertainty. And so I think that's a big reason why the Senate's going to get the job done before Election Day.
Well, let's hope so, and we're counting on good folks like yourself to push that through. He is constitutionally, allowed to do exactly what he's doing, and I think there's a lot of people on the opposite side of the aisle that can't come up with any reason why she shouldn't be approved. But I have to ask you on another quote that you said specifically regarding the Supreme Court as well. Several decisions that Chief Justice John Roberts has been involved with has disappointed conservatives. And I think that's why it's so important that Amy Coney Barrett is approved, because you don't know which way people are going to be going anytime. You can go all the way back to Souter on that. But Justice Roberts has crossed over to the liberal side. Now, you're quoted by CBN as stating that I actually think much of what is driving John Roberts is John despises Donald Trump. What makes you believe that?
Well, look, I've known John Roberts for 25 years. We were both law clerks for Chief Justice William Rehnquist. He was a number of years before I was, but we have been friends for a long time. He was down in Florida. He was part of the Bush versus Gore legal team. I actually called John and asked him to come join us, and he flew down and joined us. I think it is difficult to find two more antithetical human beings than John Roberts and Donald Trump. I just think, like, in every respect, it's almost like matter and antimatter. Like they're just, and it's my personal assessment of him that I think he just loathes the man. And what we've seen him, so I write quite a bit about this in the book, and it gives me no joy to criticize. I still consider John a friend. So what I'm saying is makes me sad to say it, but I think John Roberts has become the new Sandra Day O'Connor. And he's moved over on multiple cases to join the liberal justices because of, I think, a personal antipathy for Trump. And, Roberts at his confirmation hearing, he gave one of the most famous characterizations of what a justice should do. And he said, a justice should be like a baseball umpire. Your job is to call balls and strikes, not to root for one team or another. And what I write in the book, and I go through and with chapter and verse and give examples, is I think John has forgotten that admonition, and instead has grabbed a uniform and a cap and grabbed a bat and has started swinging really hard. And it's unfortunate. I actually devote an entire chapter in the book to Supreme Court nominations and how to get them right and where we've gone wrong. And I trace the history going back to Dwight D. Eisenhower. And it's amazing. Democrats get this right almost 100% of the time, where virtually in every instance, their nominees vote exactly as they would hope they would vote. Republicans are terrible at this. Like, we bat less than 500. And many of the worst judicial activists were Republican appointees. Earl Warren, Bill Brennan, John Paul Stevens, David Souter, Harry Blackmun, the author of Roe versus Wade. Every one of those were Republican nominees. And I trace why that is. And it's not random. It's not the flip of a coin. If you look at those justices who stayed faithful to their oath, who stayed faithful to the Constitution, people like Antonin Scalia, people like Clarence Thomas, people like Sam Alito, people like my former boss, Chief Justice William Rehnquist, they all have a similar pattern. They all served in the executive branch. They all had been outspoken conservatives, had stood up for the Constitution. And here's the most critical thing. They all had been excoriated. They had been pounded. They'd faced the heat of media attention and the cauldron, and they hadn't given in. And I think that's the most important test, is do you have a proven record in the face of opposition? And what happens a lot of times is Republicans will put forth a stealth nominee that someone will say to the president, trust me, even though there's no record to prove that they're going to stand for the Constitution, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, deep down they will, and almost without exception, that turns into a disaster.
You know, in your book, you cover so many different issues. As you said, you go through the different cases regarding Second Amendment rights, pro-life policies. You talk about school choice. You know, with Ruth Bader Ginsburg passing, and now it looks like Amy Coney Barrett, hopefully she does get approved. We are facing right now an election where we have two candidates on the left that will not let the American public know who they will nominate. They won't even admit whether they will or won't stack the court. First of all, I guess this is a two-part question for you. Will America allow them to get away with, you know, you got to pass the bill to see what's in it type approach to this? Yeah. And number two, what will a Biden court, assuming that they're going to nominate leftists, activist judges, what would that impact be on American freedom?
So on the first point, I fear the answer is yes, that the press is certainly going to let them get away with not answering the question on packing the court, not answering the question on what kind of justices they'll appoint. You know, one lesson that I think conservatives, libertarians, defenders of the Constitution should draw from all of this is the Democrats understand their policies are not popular. The reason Biden and Kamala are hiding from will you pack the court, I think their answer is yes, but they recognize that's wildly unpopular, so they're just trying to hide it. Yeah. They're not advocating in favor of a radical assault on religious liberty or a radical assault on the Second Amendment because they know those are very unpopular positions. They're not advocating a dramatic restriction of people's free speech rights because that's not what the voters want. And it's one of the things I talk about in the book, how it really started in the 1960s. The left made a conscious decision that democracy was too hard, that convincing your fellow Americans you were right on a particular issue, that took too much work. And instead, it was easier just to go to the courts and get 5 lawyers, unelected lawyers in black robes, to decree your policy outcome for the whole country. And I think it is a profoundly undemocratic approach the left has. It's why they're so mad at this vacancy for Justice Ginsburg, because they feel like they're losing their mechanism for enforcing their policy outcomes. And, you know, Dave, it's important to note, as a conservative, I don't want justices who mandate conservative outcomes. I'm not looking for policy wins on the court. I'm looking for justices who follow the law. So I'll give an example. You mentioned the chapter in the book on school choice. Yeah. School choice is an issue I'm deeply passionate about. I think it is the civil rights issue of the next century. I don't want federal courts to mandate school choice across the country. That'd be a great policy outcome, but it's not the court's job to do that. It's not required by the Constitution. If you care about school choice, as I do, the right place to fight for it is in the democratically elected legislatures, in the state legislatures or in the Senate. In the Senate, I lead the fight for school choice and have for years. On the other hand, so in the book, I talk about a case called Zellman versus Simmons Harris, and that was a challenge to the school choice program in Ohio that had helped thousands of low-income kids, mostly African-American and Hispanic kids, had given them hope, had given them an opportunity. The Supreme Court upheld that program 5-4. There were 4 justices ready to order that program be shut down and that every school choice program in America be shut down. They want to use the courts to win the policy battles and just shut down choice across the board. That is not only terrible policy, but it's also, there's nothing remotely in the Constitution or law that supports them doing that.
You know, your name has been floated about as well as a nominee. Can I ask you, would you accept that? Is that a lifetime appointment that you would want one day if it did come to your desk?
So it's not. I don't want to be a judge. I don't want to serve on the court.
Okay.
One of the things I talk about in the book at a fair amount of detail is that for each of the 3 vacancies that have happened under President Trump, he's had pretty serious conversations with me about exactly this topic. And I'm not going to say he offered me the position, but he's leaned in pretty hard to see if I would be willing to take it. And I've told him 3 times in a row, I don't want the job. I got to say, a lot of people think that's weird. They're surprised. I've spent my whole life in and around the Supreme Court. It sort of seems like a natural place for me. And they're like, well, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want it? The reason has to do with what we were just talking about, which is a principled judge stays out of political fights, stays out of policy fights. If I were a judge, I'd do that. If I were a judge, I'd play the role of umpire. I don't want to play the role of umpire. I want to play. I want to bat. Put me in, coach. I want to be in the fight. And the right place to be in the fight is in the political branches, is in the Senate. And you know, if you look at the Senate, ask yourself, how many leaders actually really step up and lead the fight on issues that matter? How many people step in and take the blows from the media, the attacks from the Democrats, and fight to defend free enterprise, to defend the Constitution? And it is a depressingly small number. And so each time I've told the president, he just added me to his list of potential nominees. I described the story about this summer. It was either June or July. I was out in California with my in-laws, and we were actually out water skiing. And I was standing on the boat dock, and I was, in swimsuit and flip-flops. My girls are out on the boat skiing behind me, and Trump calls me on my cell phone, and he says, "Ted, I'm putting out a new Supreme Court list. I want to include you. Is it okay if I add you to the list?" And I told him at the time, I said, "Listen, if it is helpful, if it's helpful to you, if it's beneficial to put me on the list, sure, I'm happy to be on it. I'm honored to be included. But I don't want the job, and I wouldn't take it. And I want to be part of confirming what I hope are 2, 3, 4, 5 principled constitutionalists to the court. I'm leading the fight right now to confirm Judge Barrett, but I don't want me to be one of them."
Well, if Congress is where the power is, I got to ask you then a couple of questions about what has been happening the past few years, specifically in the Senate. First of all, DNI Director John Ratcliffe made news this week because he declassified the document showing that Brennan's notes to President Obama unequivocally proves that Hillary Clinton approved a campaign to create a scandal against candidate Donald Trump, tying him to the Putins and the Russians and the whole thing. First question on this: why did it take almost 4 years to release these documents, and what's going to be done about it?
It's a fabulous question. It shouldn't have taken 4 years to do it. I will say, we saw, and it started when Rick Grinnell was the acting head of DNI. And Rick was there, I think, maybe 6 weeks, and he started releasing and declassifying documents, and it sent seismic waves through Washington. That should have happened 4 years ago, and there's no excuse for it not happening 4 years ago, other than we didn't have the leadership to do it. And Rick was a little bit of a bull in a china closet in that he was willing to, the deep state, the career folks, they fought tenaciously against it, but he went and did it and left. And now John Ratcliffe is there. Both Rick and John are friends. I think they both have been really courageous. Releasing, you look at the legacy of Obama, I think in many ways the most shameful legacy is that they politicized and weaponized the Department of Justice, the FBI, the CIA, the intelligence community of our government, and they turned them into essentially arms of the Democratic National Committee. And we now know that that was deliberate and blatant. You know, you look at the Brennan notes where he briefed Obama personally that the Clinton campaign cooked up this scheme in July of 2016 before the election. Hey, let's tie Trump to Russia. And it was just a political oppo dump and a hit job, which any principled leaders would have said, get the hell out of my office. That's not what the CIA is for, or the DOJ or the FBI. You ask what's going to be done about it. I don't know. I am deeply frustrated that nobody's been held accountable, that nobody meaningful has been prosecuted. I can tell you in the Senate, for 4 years, I've been trying to shine a light. I've been trying to insist on transparency. Now, you look at the separation of powers. In the Senate, we can hold hearings. We've done that. And when we've held hearings, I have cross-examined people vigorously, to put it mildly. But the legislature doesn't have executive authority. It is only the executive that can impanel a grand jury. It is only the executive that can bring an indictment. It is only the executive that can prosecute. And I'm frustrated out of my mind why they haven't held some of these people accountable 3 and 4 years ago. I hope they do now, but they haven't yet.
What about when one of those people that should be held accountable is one of your own colleagues, Senator Cruz? I have to ask you that. I asked your colleague, Senator Marsha Blackburn, this same question last month pertaining to buried reports in the New Yorker that in 2017, your colleague, Senator Mark Warner, SSCI Vice Chairman, he reviewed and shared the dossier, the FISA memo regarding Carter Page, which has now been debunked. He shared that with, I guess, through Ali Watkins, a journalist over at BuzzFeed. There's actual FBI tapes of him and Ali Watkins having discussions. So he's been suspect, and they're doing investigations on him. I got to just say, our viewers are so frustrated over all of this and Spygate and the lack of accountability. What can you do internally with your own colleagues if they're involved in this? So
a challenge on that front. Look, in order to be prosecuted, someone has to have formally broken the law. So being a political snake, being a partisan, is not in and of itself illegal. There are a lot of Democrats who are shamelessly partisan. And so Warner sharing Oppo research and trying to attack Republicans, that's not illegal. It may not be terribly honest and ethical, but it's not illegal. Now, if he unlawfully revealed classified information, that is illegal. And so the question would be where the information came from and was it classified? Was he breaking any laws? But just, look, we now know the Steele dossier was complete garbage.
Right.
That it was some combination, that it was paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC, that it had the primary subsource that is relied upon in the Steele dossier had previously been investigated for being essentially a Russian agent trying to recruit people from the Obama administration to engage in espionage against the United States. So it was complete garbage. It is not necessarily illegal for a political player, whether Mark Warner or, for that matter, it's widely reported that John McCain did the same thing and passed the Steele dossier on. Now, obviously, McCain has passed away, so that
But I know that you're short for time here. There was a leak trace attached to those documents there was pictures taken of them in the skiff. That's illegal on its own. And the FBI again investigated this and taped discussions. So isn't that just on its own a law that he broke?
It may well be. What I would say, the first 2.5, 3 years of the Trump administration, Jeff Sessions was Attorney General, and he recused himself from all of this.
Yeah.
Jeff is a friend. I think he's a decent man. I think he was in way over his head, and he was not up to the job of Attorney General. One of the things I discuss in the book, One Vote Away, is when I talked to Trump. I spent 4.5 hours at Trump Tower in November, right after he won the general. And that was when he talked to me quite seriously about the Scalia vacancy. He and I also talked about the job of Attorney General. And I told him that's the one job I would have been willing to accept. And although I was not willing to go to the court, and he also raised Secretary of Homeland Security with me, asked me if I was interested in that. And I said, hugely important, but I'm going to stay where I am in the Senate. But I told him on AG, I said, listen, there were people who were on board and supporting you way before I was. And I said, you know, if a Jeff Sessions or Rudy Giuliani or Chris Christie, if one of those guys wants it, they probably deserve it. But if you wanted me to serve in this role, I'd be willing to do so.
Yeah.
President made a different decision. He put Jeff there. I understood that. I wasn't upset about it. And I understood why. Jeff was one of his very first supporters. But unfortunately, the job was too big for Jeff. He just was not, he wasn't prepared. Being AG, particularly now, is incredibly difficult.
You mean you would not have recused yourself?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I will say, Bill Barr, I think, is a serious leader and attorney general. I think if anyone has the fortitude to take this on, it's Barr. You know, we talked about my podcast, Verdict. One of my favorite Verdict podcasts I did is Bill Barr was a guest of mine. And Bill and I have been friends for 20 years. And it's interesting. Everyone thinks of Bill as this kind of stuffy, uptight, you know, serious guy. Because when he goes on a media interview, he's, you know, surrounded by snakes.
Right.
But what was fun about the podcast environment is that we could laugh and joke, and he's got a wicked sense of humor. I hope and pray Bill follows through and holds people accountable who broke the law. It hasn't happened yet, but I hope it does.
Does he stay in a second Trump term? I
hope so. I don't think there's anyone better. And you know, what's interesting is Bill, when he took the job, it was a little bit amazing. He had nothing to gain from it. He'd already been Attorney General. He was Attorney General in his 40s under Bush. You know, he's probably made $100 million in the private sector, so he's very wealthy. He had a great life. He'd been attorney. There was no upside whatsoever to taking the job. And one of the nice things about Bill is he doesn't want another job. It's not like he's angling for doing something else.
Yeah.
I think he took the job out of national service. I think he took the job because the Department of Justice was in such disarray that he felt an obligation to come in. But you've seen the Democrats and the press and some of the career folks there try to destroy him. And actually, I will say this, Bill Barr now is a 10 times better attorney general than Bill Barr 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different age and stage in life, but I would love to see Bill stay an entire second term. I think it is an unbelievably difficult job, and I hope and believe he's up to it.
If last question for you, because I know you got to run here. If Donald Trump does not win, everything that we've been learning about Spygate, I assume, just goes away. It gets hidden again. If he does win, what do you expect is going to happen with this?
I hope what we see is a series of DOJ indictments and prosecutions. And let me be clear, I don't want political prosecutions. I don't want a Republican Department of Justice. I don't want a Republican FBI. I don't want a Democratic DOJ. I want a DOJ and FBI and CIA who follows the law. And so if people broke the law, if they abused power, and at this point the evidence is growing more and more and more, and I think the clear ringleaders behind this were Comey and McCabe and Brennan, with the explicit authorization of Obama and Biden. I think both of them were up to their eyeballs in this. And I hope we see the Department of Justice have the fortitude to impanel a grand jury and bring indictments and prosecute them for criminal laws they violated. We know that the FBI under Comey submitted fraudulent documents to a federal court and altered documents. That was when I last cross-examined Comey. I walked him, and he's slippery. He does not like to be nailed down. But
he didn't answer a question last week on that Zoom call. Not one question. I know nothing. Sergeant Klink.
It really was. You know, look, Comey, Comey has always been political, and I say that actually small p political. He's been a political player. I think Comey thought he was J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah.
You look at Hoover, who famously abused that job as director of the FBI. I mean, kept blackmail files on all sorts of people throughout government and used them against them. I think Comey, when he got in the building, the FBI headquarters is the J. Edgar Hoover building, and I think he felt like in 2016 that he played a pivotal role in ironically helping Trump win by how he handled Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And I think he felt guilty about that. And I think much of the rest of this was sort of making up for that he felt so guilty at having played a role defeating Hillary that he set himself out as this sort of self-righteous crusader to take the president down. And that's not the job of the director of the FBI.
Senator Cruz, author of One Vote Away. Everybody needs to check out this book. It's historic and also very, very contemporary, current what's going on. Does Amy Coney Barrett get approved, do you think?
Yes, I think we will confirm her by the end of the month before Election Day. Let me briefly tell folks also on the book that it's available Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you get books. And we released it last week, and it quickly shot up to the #1 best-selling book in the country on Amazon. So
congratulations. It's a great read, and I've read the digital, and I know I've got a signed copy on its way to me. That will be prominent in my library. Thank you so much, sir. Please fight on. Everybody, the media doesn't represent America. Most Americans are aware of what is going on, and they want you to fight because they just want honesty. They want honesty in our politics and in our media. Thank you so much for everything that you do, Senator Ted Cruz.
Thank you, Dave. And next time we'll do it with whiskey.
Absolutely. Can't wait. Thank you, good sir. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Senator Ted Cruz. That was great. And should have asked you what your favorite whiskey was, but I know you had to get off. We went a couple of minutes over our allotted time. Listen, yeah, I had a lot more questions I would have asked. I actually went over my allotted time. I was getting text messages from his producer. We got to stop. But listen, I could have talked about Spygate and all the political things as well. And also I wanted to go back more into SCOTUS and talk about some of the big decisions he was a part of and talks about in his fascinating book. There's a hardcover on its way to me. I think I mentioned it to you, but I did delve into the electronic version that they sent to me last night. And it's absolutely fascinating. You don't need to be a legal to understand it or be interested in it. I mean, he talks about, Van Orden versus Perry on religious liberty, or Zellman versus Simmons Harris. I'm not an attorney. That was focused on school choice. These are really important issues. What about Second Amendment rights, the Heller decision, or pro-life policies regarding the Carhart position, or some of the other major pivotal issues that are going to be coming up in the new Supreme Court session regarding Obamacare and some of these other issues as well. I find it fascinating because everything that we take for granted as Americans regarding our free speech, our Second Amendment rights, our Fifth, and Sixth Amendment rights regarding due process. Are you allowed to face your accuser? I mean, look what they did to now Justice Kavanaugh in his hearings. Absolutely atrocious. And the Democrats threw all rights out. What was it Senator Mazie Hirono said? You remember the senator from Hawaii? She said, men should just shut up. I mean, okay, this is why it is so important right now that the media need to hold the Biden-Harris campaign's feet to the fire regarding who will you nominate. I talked about this in our last interview, in episode 261, okay? Who will you nominate? Donald Trump, he came out with a long list in 2016, Federalist Society judges, right? Remember that? He talked about the Heritage Foundation judges. He wanted to put up constitutional originalist textualists in the same vein that we have seen in other incredible judges such as Scalia and Thomas. So we knew where his politics were behind the court. What is Biden and Harris doing? I said this in the last interview, and Senator Cruz just confirmed it for everybody. They will lose the election if they tell you who they will nominate. They will either lose the left because they're going to nominate moderates, or they're going to lose the moderate middle because they're going to nominate progressive leftists. They can't win the election if they tell you the truth. And the media are complicit in holding their water, in basically saying, well, that's not an important question. We don't need to second, third. It's absolutely insane. This is one of the most important, pivotal questions that any presidential candidate should be answering. And they've gotten away with it thus far. Yeah, I'm upset about it. Listen to my rant on episode 261, right before we brought on Judge Janine Pirro. Very special thanks to Whiskey Politics producer Melissa Praymonidish, who has been just chasing down Senator Ted Cruz for quite some time. At our last CPAC that we were there together, we were literally chasing Senator Ted Cruz to try and get 30-second soundbite from him. I mean, we were tripping over people. So it was an absolute honor to have him on for over 30 minutes. And again, let us know what you think here at Whiskey Politics. We'll be back again real soon, and greatly appreciate you taking the time. You're listening, viewing, wherever it may be. And please, if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends. Cheers.